This time, the hunt for the lost tomb of Queen Cleopatra. Colleen searches for clues in the hieroglyphs. Alejandro scans ancient mummies in an Egyptian hospital.
For 2,000 years, Cleopatra has been remembered as a goddess of beauty who brought Rome itself to its knees. But recent breakthroughs in DNA analysis have revealed a very different portrait of Egypt's final pharaoh. These findings do more than challenge the image of an irresistible queen. They expose a biological curse that may have been quietly destroying the entire Ptolemaic dynasty from within. Today, we will uncover the truth about Cleopatra, the secrets her body may have concealed, and why her lost tomb could become the most disturbing medical record ever recovered from the ancient world. The face. History replaced. The world has known only one version of Cleopatra, a goddess of beauty, a political genius who used her appearance to conquer the two most powerful men in Rome. Hollywood carved that image into the public imagination through Elizabeth Taylor and through sweeping historical epics in which Cleopatra moved like a perfect being while the entire Mediterranean world bowed at her feet. That version became so deeply rooted that almost no one thought to question it. But when we examine the only surviving images created during Cleopatra's own lifetime, that illusion begins to collapse. Silver tetradrachms minted during her reign reveal a completely different face, a large nose with a pronounced curve, a projecting chin, an unusually thick neck. There is nothing delicate about her features, nothing conventionally soft. This is not the face of a legendary beauty. It is the face of a dynasty. That curved nose appears on coins throughout the Ptolemaic royal line, passing from one generation to the next, like a genetic seal carved into bone and cartilage. The projecting chin appears again and again as well. These were not features unique to Cleopatra. They were the fingerprints of her bloodline. Plutarch, the historian who lived closest to Cleopatra's era, also appears to confirm this. He wrote that her beauty, taken by itself, was not extraordinary. Her true power lay in her voice, her presence, and her intelligence. Plutarch did not describe a woman who conquered others through physical beauty. He described a woman who conquered them despite her appearance. That detail is often overlooked. But if Cleopatra was not beautiful in the way humanity has imagined for centuries, what story do the features on those coins actually tell? Where did that inherited curved nose and unusually thick neck come from? The answer lies within the Ptolemaic bloodline, and that bloodline carries a history that few people have been willing to confront directly. For decades, archaeologists believed they had found a shortcut. A skeleton already resting inside a museum might lead directly to Cleopatra's DNA without anyone ever having to locate her tomb. The skeleton belonged to her sister, Arsinoe Thorf, or at least that was what everyone believed. The wrong skeleton. Arsinoe Thorf was not a minor figure in history. When Cleopatra was driven into exile, Arsinoe seized the throne. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, Arsinoe commanded the forces that surrounded the palace where Caesar had taken shelter. She was not a passive princess. She was a direct rival, and the greatest threat Cleopatra ever faced came not from Rome, but from her own blood. In 41 BC, Cleopatra persuaded Mark Antony to send assassins to the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, where Arsinoe was living in exile. Arsinoe was dragged from the sacred grounds and murdered. The assassination shocked the ancient world. But for modern science, it also provided something extremely valuable. It revealed exactly where Arsinoe had died. During the 19th century, archaeologists working at Ephesus discovered a strange octagonal tomb. Inside lay the skeleton of a young individual. The tomb's 8-sided design appeared to echo the architecture of Alexandria, particularly the Pharos lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Archaeologist Hilke Tur connected the clues. An octagonal tomb stood in the very city where Arsinoe had been murdered, and it contained the remains of a young person. Tur concluded that this was almost certainly the burial place of the exiled princess. She went even further. Using measurements of the skull recorded in 1929, Thor argued that the individual might have had a mother of African ancestry. That claim ignited a global debate. If Arsinoe had an African mother and shared the same father as Cleopatra, then the queen, long portrayed as being entirely of Macedonian Greek descent, might have carried mixed ancestry. The casting of a black actress as Cleopatra in a 2023 Netflix documentary pushed the controversy into the center of worldwide attention. The Ephesus skeleton became a potentially decisive piece of physical evidence. It was one of the few sources of data capable of challenging the long-standing academic consensus that the Ptolemaic dynasty remained a closed Macedonian Greek bloodline. Then, in January 2025, the entire theory collapsed. In 2022, a research team at the University of Vienna, led by anthropologist Gerhard Reber, rediscovered the missing skull. It had remained unnoticed in the university's archives for decades. This time, technology allowed the researchers to do more than simply examine its surface. They could see inside it. Using micro-CT imaging, they created a high-resolution digital map of its internal structure. They then drilled into the petrous bone, the densest region of the skull. This part of the human body has been described as a biological vault because it can preserve DNA long after much of the remaining skeleton has deteriorated. The results were published in the journal Scientific Reports. The skeleton was not Arsino. It was not female. It was not even an adult. The DNA contained a Y chromosome. The person once believed to be Cleopatra's sister was actually a boy between 11 and 14 years old. The scans revealed a recessed lower jaw, an asymmetrical skull, and severe cranial deformation. These features suggested conditions resembling Treacher-Collins syndrome or an extreme case of rickets. The genetic evidence pointed toward the Italian peninsula or the island of Sardinia, not Egypt. The only apparent direct path to Cleopatra's DNA had vanished completely, yet the boy left behind one detail that was impossible to ignore. He was a child with serious developmental abnormalities, yet he had been buried inside a heroon, a structure normally reserved for heroes or individuals honored almost as demigods. Such abnormalities were not random. A recessed jaw and a deformed skull are classic signs of something that genetics defines with disturbing clarity. And once researchers could no longer use another person's skeleton to investigate Cleopatra's bloodline, the inquiry was forced back to its original source, the family tree of the Ptolemaic dynasty itself. There, the pattern became clearer than any DNA analysis could have made it. The family tree that folded inward. Geneticists call this phenomenon pedigree collapse. In a normal family tree, the branches expand as we move backward through time. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents. The network grows wider with every generation, like a funnel opening toward the outside world and continually drawing new genetic material into the bloodline. Cleopatra's family tree did not expand. It folded inward upon itself. The Ptolemaic dynasty was Macedonian Greek in origin. It began when Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, took control of Egypt after Alexander's death. To preserve absolute power and what they considered a pure royal bloodline, the Ptolemies adopted the marriage traditions of the ancient pharaohs. Those traditions included marriage between full siblings. It did not happen once. It did not happen twice. It continued across generation after generation. Cleopatra's parents, Ptolemy Neithene and Cleopatra Phippa, may have been brother and sister. Her grandparents may have been an uncle and niece, or possibly full siblings as well. With each generation, the genetic funnel narrowed. By the time Cleopatra was born, it had almost completely closed. Some genetic estimates suggest that Cleopatra may have had an inbreeding coefficient of roughly 45%. To understand what that number means, it needs a point of comparison. The child of 2 first cousins, a form of marriage once common among European aristocratic families, typically has a coefficient of about 6%. A level approaching 45% would be comparable to the genetic result of repeated marriages between brothers and sisters across 4, 5, or 6 consecutive generations. That number is not an abstract statistic. It is a biological sentence. And history has recorded, with disturbing clarity, what that sentence can look like when it begins to appear in the bodies of real human beings. The price of pure blood. The clearest example of what a 45% inbreeding coefficient can mean is not found in Egypt. It is found in Spain. The Habsburg dynasty ruled Spain for nearly 2 centuries and maintained a pattern of marriage within the family similar to that of the Ptolemies. The final ruler of the Spanish Habsburg line was Charles II. His inbreeding coefficient was approximately 25%, barely more than half the level estimated for Cleopatra. He could not speak until the age of 4, He could not walk until he was 8. His lower jaw projected so severely that his upper and lower teeth could not meet. He was unable to chew properly and often had to swallow his food whole. When he died at the age of 38, the autopsy reportedly described a body almost entirely without blood, a head filled with fluid, and a heart smaller than a peppercorn. Science explains the mechanism behind such consequences through a concept known as homozygosity. Under normal circumstances, DNA functions like a conversation between two sets of genes, one inherited from the father and one from the mother. If one side carries a harmful recessive gene, the other often provides a dominant version capable of suppressing its effects. This is the biological safety net. But when two parents share almost identical genetic material, that conversation begins to disappear. The same defective genes repeatedly encounter matching copies of themselves, generation after generation. No healthy genetic variation enters the system from outside to compensate for them. The safety net vanishes. Signs of this process appear throughout Cleopatra's family. Her great-grandfather, Ptolemy VIII, carried the nickname Physcon, meaning potbelly. Historical accounts describe him as suffering from severe obesity, with legs so weak that they could barely support his body. He reportedly required assistance simply to move. Ancient descriptions also mention a swollen neck, visibly protruding eyes, and labored breathing. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy VI, was known as the flute player. He was described as physically weak and lacking authority. Modern researchers in the history of medicine have identified a consistent pattern within these accounts. The symptoms resemble inherited metabolic disorders and Graves' disease, an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid gland. It can cause protruding eyes, swelling of the neck, and a wide range of symptoms that few people would ever associate with one of history's most legendary queens. With an estimated inbreeding coefficient nearly twice that of Charles II, Cleopatra should, from a purely biological perspective, have suffered devastating consequences. Yet history describes a woman who spoke 9 languages, captivated Caesar and Antony, personally commanded a fleet at the Battle of Actium, and lived until the age of 39. The distance between what biology predicts and what history records creates a paradox that cannot be resolved by ignoring either side. But when the ancient sources are read again, not with admiration, but with the eye of a physician searching for symptoms, that paradox begins to reveal an answer. The symptoms history, admired. Plutarch left behind 2 clues that are often overlooked. The first appears in the famous story of the carpet. Popular culture imagines Cleopatra emerging from an elaborate Persian carpet before Caesar, making a dramatic entrance designed to display confidence and power. But Plutarch wrote that she was hidden inside a sack used to carry bedding, essentially a large linen bag. It was tied shut and carried on the back of a single servant named Apollodorus. The physical reality of this moment matters. For Cleopatra to be rolled up and carried like a piece of luggage by one man, she must have been exceptionally light. She was not a tall and imposing warrior queen. She appears to have had a small and slight body. When placed beside an estimated inbreeding coefficient of 45%, that small stature begins to resemble a symptom rather than an ordinary physical trait. The second clue lies in Plutarch's own statement that Cleopatra's beauty was not remarkable in itself. Her power came from her voice and her presence. This detail is usually interpreted positively. She succeeded through intelligence rather than appearance. But it is also entirely consistent with the possibility that she had to compensate for physical features that worked against her. There is another layer to the story. Graves' disease does not affect appearance alone. It can shape behavior. Excess thyroid hormones push the body into a state of constant stimulation. Energy rises to abnormal levels. Speech becomes rapid. Sleep becomes difficult. Decisions become impulsive. The willingness to accept extreme risks can increase. Ancient historians praise Cleopatra for her seemingly limitless vitality. She worked through the night. She moved constantly from one place to another. Western tradition has celebrated this as evidence of an extraordinary mind. But when those descriptions are mapped onto the thyroid disorder that may have appeared in Physcon, with his swollen neck, protruding eyes, and labored breathing, the boundary between genius and illness becomes almost impossible to define. That legendary energy may not have been evidence of greatness. It may have been a hereditary thyroid storm, passed down from the same ancestors who had already collapsed beneath its weight. If Cleopatra truly lived with these conditions, with joint pain, disrupted sleep, and a small, physically vulnerable body, she could not simply have endured them in silence. A ruler who commanded armies and received foreign diplomats needed a body that could continue to function, and Cleopatra had access to a resource that almost no one else in the ancient world possessed: the queen who treated herself. The story of the pearl has often been told as a symbol of extravagant luxury. Cleopatra removed one of her earrings, dropped the priceless pearl into vinegar, waited for it to dissolve, then drank the mixture to win a wager with Mark Antony over who could host the most expensive banquet. But look more closely. Calcium carbonate reacts with acetic acid. This was not simply an impulsive spectacle, it was a precise chemical reaction. Cleopatra understood the properties of matter. She knew which substances reacted with one another, under what conditions, and what result they would produce. That knowledge did not end with pearls. Egypt was one of the greatest centers of medical knowledge in the ancient world. And if Cleopatra lived with chronic pain caused by genetic decline, perhaps resembling the joint disorders that later afflicted the Habsburg dynasty, then she was sitting at the center of the most advanced network of medicinal substances available in her era. Opium was harvested from poppy fields around Thebes. It could have eased her pain and allowed her to remain standing through diplomatic ceremonies that lasted for hours. Then there was kefi, a complex blend of aromatic ingredients burned inside temples at night. Plutarch wrote that the scent of kefi could guide a person into sleep and release tension, as though loosening a knot. For someone who may have trembled from an excess of thyroid hormones, kefi was not merely perfume, it was a sedative. The blue lotus offered another possibility. When infused into wine, the flower could produce mild effects on the nervous system, creating calmness and gentle euphoria. Ancient historians describe Cleopatra as possessing an almost legendary magnetism, an ability to captivate people almost immediately. But was that power entirely natural? Or did a carefully prepared mixture of lotus-infused wine and adrenaline help her rise above her own pain, transforming a suffering woman into a presence that appeared almost supernatural? Cleopatra was also believed to have written a work on cosmetics known as Cosmeticorum, which was later cited by the physician Galen. She did not merely use cosmetics, she studied them. If thyroid disease caused swelling around the neck, broad collars and elaborate jewelry could have served as camouflage. If her genetic inheritance affected her eyes, Cole might have altered how those features were perceived. If metabolic disorders damaged her skin, the creams she developed may have served a medical purpose as much as an aesthetic one. Cleopatra's interest in cosmetics may not have come from vanity. It may have been a survival strategy. At the deepest level, consider her choice of partners. Cleopatra married two of her younger brothers, Ptolemy III and Ptolemy XIV, in accordance with royal tradition. Yet, she had no children with either of them. Not one child was born from those closely related marriages. Instead, she turned toward Rome, first to Caesar and then to Antony. Both men stood entirely outside her bloodline. Cleopatra had 4 children, and every one of them had a Roman father. The fates of Cleopatra's siblings were tragic. Ptolemy XXX drowned in the Nile while still a young puppet king. Arsinoe was executed. The deformed boy buried inside the octagonal tomb may have belonged to an extended branch of the same royal bloodline. Cleopatra witnessed this world from within. She grew up surrounded by living evidence of genetic collapse, including Physcon, her father, and her physically vulnerable siblings. If she understood that her dynasty was slowly dying, then refusing to have children with her brothers and choosing only outsiders as fathers was more than a political calculation. It may have been a biological strategy, an attempt to reopen the genetic funnel and rescue the next generation from the cycle that had created her. Together, this entire system of chemistry, medicine, cosmetics, and reproductive strategy reveals a woman who was not simply enjoying power. Cleopatra was fighting a war on 2 fronts, against Rome on the outside and against her own DNA within. For the past 20 years, another woman has been fighting to reach that same truth beneath layers of stone along the Mediterranean coast. The tomb still waiting. Taposiris Magna lies about 30 miles west of Alexandria. For generations, it remained a largely forgotten field of ruins, until Kathleen Martinez decided to stake her career on it. Martinez did not follow the traditional path into archaeology. She was a former criminal lawyer from the Dominican Republic who entered the field during Middle Age. She did not approach Cleopatra as a chapter in a history book. She approached her as a case that needed to be solved. Most scholars believed Cleopatra's tomb had disappeared forever. It might lie beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, or it might have been destroyed by earthquakes. Martinez followed a different line of reasoning. Cleopatra was not merely trying to escape death. She was trying to escape the humiliation of being chained by Octavian and paraded through the streets of Rome during his triumph. She wanted to be buried beside Mark Antony. She wanted to be immortalized as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. To achieve that, she needed a tomb that would never be violated. She may have chosen the one place where no one would think to search. In 2022, the ground beneath Taposiris Magna revealed something that seemed almost impossible. Martinez and her team broke through layers of limestone and discovered a tunnel carved directly into solid bedrock. It extended for more than 4,200 feet, nearly 1 mile. It stood about 6 feet high, was filled with mud and seawater, and ran directly toward the Mediterranean. Engineers described it as a geometric marvel, constructed with a level of precision comparable to the legendary Tunnel of Eupalinos in ancient Greece. The scale of the structure seemed almost irrational, unless Taposiris Magna had never been the minor temple that scholars once imagined. The discovery of a submerged harbor offshore strengthened that possibility. Taposiris Magna may not have been an isolated religious outpost. It may once have been a concealed royal center. Inside 16 tombs cut directly into the rock, Martinez and her team discovered mummies with golden tongues placed inside their mouths. These amulets were intended to help the dead speak in their own defense before Osiris in the afterlife. Martinez believes this was not an ordinary cemetery. It may have been a royal entrance chamber, filled with courtiers prepared to speak before the gods, perhaps to announce the arrival of their queen. If those closest to Cleopatra were laid there to wait for her, then the final doorway may still lie deeper within the stone. If Martinez breaks through the last barrier, she will not merely discover a queen, she will discover a medical record. After everything science has revealed, including an estimated inbreeding coefficient of 45%, possible thyroid disease running through the family, unusual features preserved on royal coins, and the small body suggested by Plutarch's account, the answer to the central question begins to take shape. Cleopatra was almost certainly not a perfect genetic miracle. No one carries an inbreeding coefficient of 45% without consequences. Yet she was not a passive victim either. She may have been what some researchers describe as a mosaic survivor, someone who escaped severe outward deformities through genetic chance while still carrying hidden burdens. Thyroid dysfunction, a fragile body, patterns of behavior shaped by centuries of close family reproduction. And she may have deliberately constructed an entire system of survival. Chemistry to control pain, medicinal substances to stabilize her nerves, cosmetics to reconstruct her appearance, Roman partners to break the genetic cycle for the next generation. The real image of Cleopatra is more impressive than the legend, but also far more brutal. She was not simply a goddess of beauty who manipulated Rome through physical attraction. She was a woman of extraordinary intelligence trapped inside a body that may have been betraying her. She used every tool that the science of her age could provide to create the illusion of an all-powerful queen, while silently fighting against her own DNA. For now, the tunnel beneath Taposiris Magna remains silent. Genetic sequencing technology is ready. If Martinez reaches the stone sarcophagus, science may finally read the genetic code of Egypt's last pharaoh directly, for the first time in 2,000 years. The answer inside could confirm what the indirect evidence appears to suggest. Cleopatra was not the symbol humanity created. She was something more complicated, more unsettling, and ultimately far more worthy of admiration. The truth about Cleopatra is more complex than the legend that has captivated humanity for 2 millennia, and perhaps that is exactly what she would have wanted.